மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. Thank you.
And this is a pretty aggressive setup from White's point of view. We'll start with h4. Now, in these variations, White has an abundance of move orders. We'll see the knight, as I mentioned, can go through h3, it can go through e2, White may first play bishop c4, or he may leave the bishop on f1. So we're sort of kind of also looking at types of positions. Now, this is going to be much easier in a couple of minutes once we make our outline. So here's the main sort of variation that we have to be perhaps worried about. h4, h6, and now, for example, knight h3. Or knight e2, both moves should transpose. Maybe knight h3 is a little more flexible since it doesn't block the bishop. Now, in these variations, White is gearing up for this big piece formation. Knight goes to f4, bishop to c4, sort of very aggressive, potentially aiming at our king side, or the e6 square, as we'll see. But, again, the Kann, very solid opening. We haven't done anything wrong. We're just developing our pieces. We should be okay. So knight h3 slash knight e2, e6, knight f4, bishop h7. One more word I'd like to say here. I definitely think e6 is the way to play here. It's also possible to play knight f6, but again, we definitely will need to play the move e6. So we might bring out the bishop first, we might bring out the knight first. So it gives us more options. That's going to be true for every variation here. I am playing e6 before developing the knight. More flexibility for our position. So e6, knight f4, bishop h7. Now, bishop c4, knight f6. So here, White has two options. As I've already mentioned, you have this knight on f4, bishop on c4. White is actually quite often trying to make some sort of sacrificial, brilliancy prize game here. So White has two setups here to attack e6. The first one that we can have a look at is the move queen e2. And this is actually a variation that I have faced once, which had a really funny end. So White is being as aggressive as possible. He's already potentially planning to take on e6. And I played the move bishop d6 here. Now in this position, White would be well advised to simply maybe just castle or play bishop e3, after which I think Black has a very fine normal game after, for example, castles and knight d7. It looks scary for Black with all of these White's pieces potentially aiming at the king, but it's a very, very solid position. This bishop on h7, which normally gets traded really early, is very powerful, not only as a defender, but if White castles, that's going to be exerting massive pressure in its position. So after bishop d6 here, as I mentioned, best for White would be, for example, c3. That looks like a reasonable enough move. Castles. And again, maybe White should just castle short here, but doesn't really seem to be part of the attacking equation here. But it's really hard to do something because if he goes like bishop e3, this can be quite a problem. There's b5, b4 ideas. The queen can go to a5. It's the simple knight d7 here is possible. So White's attack is really not working here. Let's say he goes castles. I just like the simple rook e8, make sure there's no sack here. Knight d7 is coming next. And an important idea to remember here is that this knight can potentially go to d5 to blockade this bishop completely. This queen can go to c7. We're going to look at an example game of this in a moment. But how my game proceeded here is my opponent played a very hasty bishop takes e6, which you may have been wondering about. Now this looks like quite a strong move because after pawn takes, knight e6, we have this x-ray against the king. Could be troublesome. There's knight c7 ideas in the air. If queen goes to e7, I suppose White can even play knight takes g7 check, among other possibilities. But my opponent was in for a rude surprise when after he played bishop e6, I simply played castles. And it turns out White is just dead lost here. There's nothing to be done. Now, with the king safe out of harm's way in the e-file, looks like White can maybe just snag a pawn, go bishop b3. Too many problems in the e-file. Rook e8, bishop e3, bishop takes f4, leading to game over, up a piece. Otherwise, what can really White do in the game? He castled, but after bishop takes f4, simply up a piece for 2 pawns. Bishop f7, rook f7, bishop f4. No problem at all here for Black to convert the piece after, for example, the simple knight to d7. So I think this setup with queen e2 is pretty harmless here. Bishop d6, sacrifices don't really work in e6 here, so very solid setup for Black. So instead, White should play the move castles. Get that king to safety quickly, and potentially prepare rook e1, getting ready to sacrifice on e6. So here, bishop to d6 is still the way to go. we're preparing to castle, and also preparing to just simply finish development. We may, if need be, we can snag off this knight, but simply continuing with knight d7 and developing is the preference here. Now white has two interesting options. The game that almost everyone knows here, a very famous continuation, is knight takes e6. This was played by the legendary Mikhail Tal in the World Championship match against Mikhail Botvinnik. And this was a very famous game, clash of the styles. Tal was the attacking genius, the attacking madman, magician from Riga. But Botvinnik, for this match, carefully prepared in order to deny Tal the type of positions he wanted, or to an extent lure him into positions like these where Tal would sacrifice, but Botvinnik had already worked out the proper defenses. So this is a continuation that, as I said, has been played back in 1960, but maybe we'll still find some followers. Just important, it's a famous game, just could be worthwhile to know what to do here. Pawn takes, bishop takes e6. The king is caught in the middle of the board. However, as Botvinnik showed, knight d7, rook e1, the very awesome queen c7 here. The king, yes, there's a potential x-ray here with a potential discovered check, but nothing good. The move that Tal played in the game was bishop to g8 check, and Botvinnik played a very, very famous sequence. King f8, trades, knight goes to f5. Looks like white has some initiative, definitely some attack coming, maybe queen f3 next. Knight in f5 is very strong, but Botvinnik realized that this knight was indeed so strong that he was willing to give up this h6 pawn here, and at the cost of this pawn, now he's down three pawns for the piece. However, all his pieces are out, the king is safe, this rook is ready to come out, and he ended up winning this. It was also later discovered that despite Botvinnik's brilliant idea, it was fully possible to play the move king d8, sort of running away to the queen side. In general, in this variation, there's not enough compensation for white. Of course, you have to watch out for the tricks, but there's just two pawns for the piece, and with no good discovered check, black is going to be completely okay. So this was the aggressive Michael Tal option of sacrificing after castling bishop d6, knight e6. It doesn't work. So I think a better move here, definitely a better move and a more thematic move is rook e1. This is what white is trying to do. He's desperate to land the killing blow here. However, after castling short, despite all this pressure on the e6 pawn, there's absolutely nothing. c3, and now you have to just remember, you have to be vigilant. Again, e6 pawn under heavy pressure, simple rook e8. One way to fall in trouble here is knight d7. This indeed leads to a nice sacrifice for white here after knight e6, pawn takes, rook e6. There's this discovered check, of course, being threatened, and the bishop on d6 hanging. So gotta watch out for that. But after rook e8, and I have a really nice excerpt here from a game that I found, which just shows how solid and black's position is, and how white really has no threats despite his aggressive setup. So queen f3 was played, knight to d7, and again, black is already potentially toying with the idea of e5 breaking the center, and even if that was not on the cards, which I think it absolutely is, e5 is a threat here, black can continue playing very solid moves, queen to c7, maybe b5, maybe c5. In any case, white reacted with knight d3, has to control the e5 square. Queen c7 came anyway, bishop went to f4, and now came a sequence we talked about already, b5, trades, bishop b3, c5. So I talked about this bishop on h7, never being traded off, very powerful piece. White took on c5, takes, queen takes, and of course no threats for white at all. And in this position, black is doing quite well, especially after rook d1, a5. This pawn on h4 looking very strange. Black is leading a thematic pawn minority attack here, and went on to win a very, very nice example here. After a3, b4 was played, and now after trades, rook c1, queen d4, the whole point of the minority attack is to weaken your opponent's three pawns, try to give him an isolated pawn. Here, it's exactly what was going on. Queen on d4, very powerfully exerting pressure on b2. Very, very troublesome position for white. Already in big danger. After pawn takes b4, queen b2, white tried to bail out into this endgame, but rook to b8, this pawn on b4 was a goner. And black ended up winning in the endgame here after picking up the pawn on b4. So I think this should deal with the most popular, maybe most important to know variation white has. Let's actually go all the way back here at his disposal, involving the early h4, followed by playing knight e2 or knight h3, going to f4, against which we're going to stay flexible with e6. Yeah, we let that knight come to f4, go back into our shell. Bishop to c4 here. Now we're playing knight f6, And the next move is simply bishop d6, and then we just need to watch out for tactics on the e6 square, and you also have to keep in mind that none of these sacrifices in e6 really work. We have been, this variation has been quite explored for a number of years, and you can just be armed with the knowledge, yeah, white's pieces are aggressive, but not very threatening. One more option I quickly want to cover here is bishop d3. This is a rare move, but I faced it once, and I was actually fortunate enough to have sort of anticipated this idea from my strong FIDE master opponent, and I was able to display a novelty that refutes this whole variation, which to my knowledge has still not been played. So I quickly want to share it with you. This is a very interesting line where white is going all out, sacrificing this pawn, going for a quick gambit. Bishop e3, gaining some time in the queen. Now queen goes to d6, and now the stunning move, knight takes e6. So of course, if pawn takes e6 here, then queen h5 is going to be a problem for the king. Believe me on that one. So queen e6 is sort of forced. Bishop takes h7, rook h7, queen d3. And this position had been known from previous Grandmaster game, which white won. It was thought as a dangerous sacrifice. White's whole compensation is this king stuck in the center. Rook is awkward. This king's about a castle. Both rooks flying to the central files. However, I was able to, like I mentioned, anticipate this idea, and I'd analyzed it with an engine sometime before the game, and simply playing g6, allowing white to castle long. Of course, mate in one's a scary threat, but no fear. Bishop e7 was played in the game. My opponent played bishop c5, very aggressive, but now after simply queen d5, it transpired that there's simply not enough firepower for white because of this move g6, not only taking away the f5 square from the knight, but also potentially preparing to defend along the 7th rank. For example, as in the game, bishop takes, knight e4. I played f5, but even slightly more precise would have been just the simple rook g7, preparing the move f5, where the rook would play tremendous defense on the 7th rank. As a brief side note, just want to share maybe this novelty with you. I don't know if it'll come in handy, but it certainly won me one game, so don't mind sharing that wealth if possible. So, yeah, in general, we have dealt with this option of bringing the knight to f4, so it's now time to consider other move orders in this situation. Now, white can also play the immediate knight h3 or the immediate knight e2, against which I have a simple formula to remember. So let's say he goes knight e2 or knight h3. This is true for both. We're playing e6, which we're already aware of that. Now white should follow with knight f4. If he follows with h4 here, then we play h6, and this is simply a transposition to what we've already looked at. So knight f4 is this other move order. Perhaps white isn't planning to play with h4. To sort of just, again, one of these other things where white has so many possible ways to reach the position. But here I actually have a suggestion that can be applied in many situations, and these variations should hopefully make it easier to remember in positions where white does not play the move h4. That rule of thumb is when white doesn't play h4, we play h4. But that's illegal, so we're going to do it with the queen. Queen to h4. Now this is a pretty rare idea. Not super rare, but definitely throws white out of his comfort zone. First of all, this is a really shocking move, but the idea of playing queen h4 is actually to just completely stop this h4 move from white. Furthermore, this queen on h4 is kind of hard to move because there's no g3, for example, and the queen is actually quite influential, especially when when white takes on g6, opens up the h-file for us, and now this queen on h4 can potentially exert pressure on the open h-file, and it's also exerting pressure along this 4th rank. So quite an unusual move, and I'm going to show a couple more cases where we can play it. Here it works quite well. For example, here's a game where white played c3, and actually black doesn't need to do anything crazy just because he went queen h4, just follow normal development, which is what happened after knight d7, queen went to f3, knight gf6, white finally decided to get the bishop pair, h takes g6, so black is very solid. We'll see in a lot of these variations, white does get the two bishops here, but no problem for black here. Bishop d3, and now came a nice move from black, e5. So utilizing this queen, putting pressure on the d4 pawn, breaks in the center with e5. After bishop e3, trades, castles. Black is up in development, castles, bishop to c5, and black was actually starting to overtake the initiative here. Of course, if a bishop takes, then knight takes. The queen at h4 is very powerful, can potentially even swing to a4 in some positions. Exerts good pressure on the position. The h2 pawn is in check, the whole king side is in check, and furthermore, it also takes white really outside of what he's hoping to achieve here. So that's a nice way, I think, to play this variation. When they play h4, yeah, we're going to roll with those punches. We're going to retreat back a little bit, but we're really solid. But when white tries to sort of expedite this maneuver or sort of omit h4, then we're going to hit him with queen h4. So that's an interesting idea here. So that deals with pretty much the important aspects of or the most important lines where white can go knight to f4. Again, rules of thumb. When they play h4, we go h6. Remember, Botvinnik, keep in mind the sacrifices in e6, but know that they shouldn't work. When they play the expedited knight to f4 idea, know we have this queen h4 idea, very solid for black. And then we continue knight d7, bishop d6, castle long. And, well, of course, you got to pay attention to what's going on in the board as well. And that really covers most of, if not all, of white's important options here. Another one I can actually mention here is one that's quite rare, but I face quite a bit of times because I keep playing this master opponent over the years who keeps playing this variation. So I'll give it a brief mention. The variations involving the pawn going to f4. So how this player always played against me was like this. And this is a pretty decent variation. Basically, white is playing a normal Caro Kann, except he's playing it as if this pawn was on f2. He's trying to use some extra benefits from the pawn on f4, for example, to go knight e5. So quick rule of thumb here. For example, they meet at f4 after e6 without h4. I think is a little dubious here because it allows us to. Well, first of all, I should also mention that we have to always be careful about this pawn going to f5 because this would potentially, in some variations, allow this knight to go to this beautiful outpost on f5. So what we want to do here is actually set up quite solidly. Let's say knight f3, you can go bishop d6, bishop d3, and to get more control over f5, we can go knight e7, followed by like knight d7, queen c7. Very, very solid. This pawn on f4 is not all good and well for white. Of course, it gets more space, but it does block this bishop, does weaken some dark squares here. And the pawn itself could also be a target. And light squares are also weakened, of course. The pawn can no longer influence g4 and e4. So that's about a quick f4. With h4, h6, f4, this makes a little more sense in my opinion because white may be getting ready for some kingside activity. For example, knight f, or rather maybe a more precise move order, knight f3, knight d7, h. Basically, again, playing this like a normal Caro Kann. The difference here is that for black, again, I would be careful in castling short now because we have to watch out for f5 ideas. So I would try to exploit this pawn on f4 by targeting it quickly. For example, bishop goes to d2, queen to c7. So the idea here is now I want to keep this pawn and this whole diagonal in my sights now that it's a little weaker. Also, don't really have the same ideas here of going to d5 anymore because I have to worry about what white has. Not really going to go knight e4. Basically, white has different ideas here. He's primarily focused on playing knight e5, just want more control over that square. Queen c7 castles, and now an important idea here is to play c5 relatively quickly, because again, I want to just weaken white's control over e5, which will make all the downsides of f4 apparent, but none of the benefits. And for example, after pawn takes bishop c5, very nice position. There can be rook d8, there can be rook to c8. Some positions you may even castle long, but if we get enough counter chances on the queen side, we can just castle short as well. So that's a brief overview of these f4 moves. Again, very rare. I've only faced it from one player. I faced it quite a bit of times, but only because I keep playing this one player who always plays this variation. And so far, I have 1 draw and 3 wins in this line against him. So perfectly happy with black's position. But this just about rounds up all the alternatives white has to the Caro Kann. To the classical Caro Kann main lines here. So again, knight c5 we talked about. Here we have calm b6, aggressive e5. Both are good choices. And here, the most important line is in my opinion, these. We have to worry about this h4 and then the knight swinging to f4. But again, if no h4, we go queen h4. If they do go h4, then just the simple knight d7, bishop d6. Watch out for e6 ideas. And of course, we started this whole chapter with analyzing knight f3, knight d7, bishop to d3, which is white trying to play some slow, calm chess here. And against which I said, look, if you don't worry about a draw, just worry about playing good moves. There's so many pieces on the board. We can always look to unbalance the position at a later time. In general, I think all the variations presented in this chapter do not pose a problem for us. Simply, there's just things to keep in mind, just in case. And again, to reiterate, I think the most important variation is this one that we have on the board right now, the most solid try for white. And I just wanted to show you how, in my experience, lots of players have a negative attitude here. That is, I don't think, the right approach, not the approach that I have. Good moves and knowing the plans wins the game, no matter what the position is, of course, in these from the opening. So I hope you take these lessons to heart, and I hope that you can become an absolute monster with the classical variation, the Capablanca variation, the classical variation.
மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. Thank you.